Over a lifespan of 60 years, so far, the James Bond cinematic franchise has employed the efforts of 12 different directors, 6 different leading men, and numerous screenwriters, editors, production designers, and other behind-the-scenes talent. In many ways, it's not too dissimilar to other popular long-running film series, but there is one crucial difference, a particular element of consistency that sets it apart from most of its competitors. And that's that the Bond franchise, at its core, is what many have called one of the most successful family businesses in all of entertainment. Because, since its very inception in 1962, it's always been controlled by the Broccoli family. American Albert Cubby Broccoli was already a successful businessman and producer when he teamed with Canadian Harry Saltzman in 1961 to form EON Productions, the acronym standing for Everything or Nothing. Together, they purchased the film rights to Ian Fleming's popular series of British spy novels starring the heroic MI6 agent James Bond, and, initially partnering with United Artists for additional financing, guided the franchise together until 1974, when, shortly after completing The Man with the Golden Gun, Saltzman left the franchise, selling his half of the rights to MGM, who to this day share control with the Broccoli family, though most involved are quick to point out it's still ultimately the family, and not MGM, who guide the majority of the series' creative decisions. Cubby Broccoli would continue to oversee the franchise without Saltzman, and would remain involved until his death in 1996 at the age of 87. Thankfully, by that point, a succession plan was already in play, as 1 year before his death, control of EON was passed over to Cubby's very capable heirs. Cubby's daughter Barbara was born in 1960, and therefore has spent almost her entire life under the shadow of Bond. She was on set in diapers during Connery's early films, and has admitted that she was 7 years old before she finally realized this James Bond fellow her dad kept talking about was a fictional character. She officially began working on the series at age 17, working in the publicity department for The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977, and worked her way up over the following years, eventually serving as assistant director on Octopussy and associate producer on The Living Daylights. Barbara's mother already had another son from a previous marriage when she married Cubby in 1959. Michael G. Wilson was 17 when Cubby became his stepfather, and therefore 1 year old when his half-sister Barbara was born. Michael, too, would ultimately get involved with the Bond business, first as a legal advisor, then producer, and eventually as a co-screenwriter on several of the films. And so, Cubby certainly felt confident that his children, the half-siblings, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, could continue the work of managing the franchise, and they have done so ever since his death, following Cubby's lead of guiding the franchise through various changes in real-world social and political issues and ever-evolving filmmaking trends. To this day, it is Broccoli and Wilson who come up with each film's premise, who dream up each new villain, who decide which topical issue or global concern to reference, and, most importantly, who will play Bond. So far, they've only made that crucial decision once, but it's safe to say their choice of Daniel Craig shows they have a keen eye for what it takes to become the new face of the franchise. This year, the pair is under scrutiny as they decide on the second James Bond actor of their era, and it's safe to say they're certainly feeling the pressure of the decision. Bond is one of the most iconic cinematic characters of all time, the franchise arguably the most successful movie series ever when factoring in both box office and longevity. It has to be a very hard decision to not only choose the new leading man, but then to make sure to continuously steer the franchise and ensure it does not lose its enduring relevance. You have to assume it's nice for the pair whenever they can occasionally take a break and work on a film with far less pressure, one where each casting choice is less scrutinized, one where every decision doesn't come along with the weight of 60 years of comparison. Perhaps that's part of the reason why, since 2014, EON Productions have worked on a handful of smaller, non-franchise films, small romantic dramas and thrillers. And yet, perhaps they still felt that certain itch, that inner pull to see if they perhaps could start up their own successful franchise, one not inherited from their father, but built by the two of them from the ground up. But, if you're going to take on that challenge, perhaps it's still best not to stray too far from the genre that's made your family business so successful. The year is 2020, and EON Productions, working with Paramount Pictures, is ready to launch the next big cinematic spy thriller franchise based on a literary series with The Rhythm Section. Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, where we've made timely and haven't taken lightly to discussing Blake Lively. Hashtag the rhyming section.
Very good. I'm proud of you, Chris.
Thank you. I had actually a few more. I had praised highly, take kindly, and HIV.
Oh, that's not your best work. I'm glad you. No. Yeah, I think you made the right call.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you.
But the reason we got this beautiful poetry from Chris is because today we are continuing our March mix-up, which, as we know, has been an entire month dedicated to spy thrillers. You know, last episode we took a little bit of a detour, and for the first time we gave ourselves a little bit of a break, didn't we, Chris? We allowed ourselves to talk about some more positive franchise kind of perspectives by doing our first episode of Success to Series and talking about the James Bond franchise, a very successful, one of the most successful film franchises of all time, one that's near and dear to both of our hearts and millions of other people. And that's very appropriate because today we're looking at a movie that is, in certain ways very tied to the Bond franchise, or at least certain elements of the Bond franchise, which we'll get into. And that is... Also, is this one of the most recent movies we've ever done? It has to be, right?
Yes.
This is a very, very recent film. We are looking at January 2020's The Rhythm Section. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about The Rhythm Section?
For sure. It is directed by Reed Moreno. She's mostly known as a cinematographer, especially a premier TV director. She had a lot to do with The Handmaid's Tale when it first came out. This is written by Mark Burnell, who actually adapted his own novel of the same name. He actually has 4 books in this series. I found that out.
4 books in the series, not 4 books, not 4 movies in the series.
Yes, exactly. We should also mention, as Trev said, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson are the producers on this movie. Again, the producers of James Bond, head of EON Productions. The budget...
It's Michael G. Wilson, Chris. Come on. Let's give the man his due here, yeah.
Right. What am I? Chris R. Sorgiovanni. The budget of this one is $50 million. Domestically, it made $5.4 million. And guess what, Trev? Worldwide, this thing made $5.9 million.
Ooh, yeah.
Yes. This is
not good.
No, Paramount projected to lose $30 to $40 million on this movie. It actually had the worst wide opening weekend of all time for a film playing in over 3,000 theaters.
Yep. So if nothing else, this movie does have a record. You can't take that away from The Rhythm Section.
No.
We've looked at a lot of catastrophic failures. This is way up there. When you say, wow, the worst wide opening ever for a movie playing in over 3,000 theaters. Now, as we get more into the discussion, I'm sure both of us have some thoughts on, is that the most fair kind of criticism of this film, considering when it came out and elements like that? And of course, we'll discuss that. But no question here why we won't be seeing The Rhythm Section 2. That's for sure.
No.
But let's talk about how we even got here. And I think maybe, did we want to start by talking about, the main lady of the hour, the leading lady of the film? Because obviously this was very much developed as, I don't want to say a star-making vehicle, but certainly a star vehicle, right? When we... EON Productions, when they make a Bond film, obviously we talked about this last time. Who is Bond is very important. So if you decide to adapt the Stephanie Patrick series, as I believe the books are called, the big question is, well, who is going to play Stephanie Patrick? Who will be the female Bond? And I'll say more about whether that's a good comparison later, right?
Yeah.
But who took over that part is Blake Lively. So let's talk about Blake Lively a little bit, shall we?
Yeah, for sure. I think she's awesome. She's pretty good in everything I've ever seen. My favorite work of hers is 2016's The Shallows.
Yeah, me too.
That is, I think I reread your Letterboxd review, Trev, and you're saying it's like maybe the second best shark movie since Jaws.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, I was going to say coming in with a hot take, but I don't know if it's that much of a hot take. I will say in my mind, The Shallows is the second best shark movie of all time. The first, of course, being Sharknado.
Yes. And Trev's third, a shark aficionado, by the way.
Yeah, third being Jaws, of course. That's the breakdown. No, I don't know if I can't remember if I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review, Chris. I probably did, but I've long said that The Shallows is so good that I honestly believe if they had released it as Jaws The Shallows, it would like fit into that franchise, right? Like, I know like the problem with the Jaws series, as much as I actually really like Jaws 2, I think Jaws 2 is a very underrated sequel. 3 is total crap. 4 is so bad it's at least fun.
Yeah.
But they had this weird hang up on the Jaws series where they wanted it to always be about the Brodies, and I never understood that. It's like, why wouldn't every Jaws sequel just be a different story about a great white? And I think The Shallows is such an effective shark, kind of thriller that's what a Jaws sequel should have been. And I honestly feel like that could have been a Jaws sequel and been looked at as like, oh, that's the second best Jaws movie now, right?
Right.
But instead for me, it kind of settles as the second best shark movie. And yes, you're right. I own many shark movies. I will watch any shark movie. But I'm not unaware most of them are crap. That's why I watch them.
Sure.
Shallows, actually pretty legit. And a lot of that is up to her because honestly, that movie is 90% just her, right? That is very much a movie that is going off of her performance. And I think she's quite good in it. I think in general, and Chris, it sounds like you would agree, I do think she's very underrated. And I think a lot of this falls to... Blake Lively, to me, is one of those definitely falls into maybe needs a better agent territory. Because I look at her filmography and I just think, man, there's not a lot of work here that seems to be living up to what I think she can bring. Because you look at her in a small performance in The Town, which I think she's very, very good in. I think even a movie as like crappy as Green Lantern, it's not like she doesn't have egg on her face from that movie.
Sure.
I don't think her performance is what sinks that film. I think she's quite good in Cafe Society. I know we don't like to talk about Woody Allen in these parts, but I think that's actually a fairly decent recent Woody Allen movie. She's quite good in that. I still haven't seen A Simple Favor. I've heard really good things about her in that as well. But yeah, I don't know if it's maybe just because she comes from like Gossip Girl, or if it's just people kind of maybe some men kind of associate her too much with Sister of the Traveling Pants and aren't willing to give that much credit.
Sure.
But I don't know if it just feels like she could be doing better work, but I just think in general she seems underrated and maybe not quite living up to her potential. Obviously this movie was intended to change that, but it didn't quite work. What do you think?
I think she has a lot in common with her husband Ryan Reynolds. And I think for a long time, like Ryan Reynolds, Hollywood tried to make him happen. And remember, it didn't take until Deadpool to make him happen. People forget that Ryan Reynolds wasn't the Ryan Reynolds we know now for a long, long time. And I think Blake Lively kind of falls in the same category that she gets work, she does films, she does TV, she's kind of all over the place. She's kind of a household name in a way, but nothing has really broken through the cultural zeitgeist.
Shallows probably came closest, right? And that's not like it was successful, but not a mega success.
And even that was 6 years ago. Like that's actually crazy to me to see that was in 2016. So the rhythm section absolutely was meant to maybe be not her Deadpool, that's not what I mean, but like maybe finally the franchise that Blake Lively deserves.
Well, and more beyond that, Chris, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, right? But Blake Lively is an attractive woman.
You don't say.
She's pretty easy on the eyes, right? And I think, unfortunately, she might fall into... We talked about this with Alexandra Daddario, too. This idea of when people are, like, attractive to this level, it's really actually unfortunate for them to a certain degree, especially women, right? This is obviously much more of a women problem.
Yeah.
Because Hollywood will only want to look at them as kind of like the pretty lady, right? The sexy lady to put into like certain kinds of roles. And I think, look, it's not like either of us are saying Blake Lively is Meryl Streep or Frances McDormand, but we are saying that Hollywood might seem to like not even want to allow her to evolve into that.
Sure.
And I definitely feel like whatever we're going to say about the quality of the film, I think the rhythm section, because of how like the kind of character she plays, how she's portrayed in the film, it didn't feel to you like a very calculated move on her part to finally break away from that. I think she's very aware of like
very,
her status.
very, very much.
Yes.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And her saying, "Look, I can do more. Right? I don't have to just be." Even The Shallow is a movie we like. I don't just have to be the girl in a bikini on a rock for the entire movie. I can actually be much more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's definitely make me not hot in this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that kind of feeds off to how she came to the rhythm section as a property. Again, wanted to break free. I think you're right, actually. Now that the more I think about it, is break free of the sex object. That's not that she has been really in her career, but I think just completely breaking through for sure.
No, to her credit, she's done a nice job of never allowing herself to fall completely into like just the sexual object. You know?
Yes.
I'm just saying, unfortunately, I think a lot of the power players in Hollywood might view her that way, and I think that's the unfortunate thing.
100%.
Yeah.
So, she actually reached out to Reed Moreno specifically to make a movie with her. She loves The Handmaid's Tale and heard that Reed Moreno was like a central figure to that series. Yeah. And she wanted to do something with Reed. Well, Reed was extremely busy with her schedule to do really anything. And I guess Blake got in touch with her agent, and her agent was like, we have this one afternoon on a Saturday for like an hour, if you want to meet her. And they met and they talked. They just immediately got along. And Reed would not stop talking about the rhythm section and this idea and this script by Mark Burnell that she was so passionate about making. So then basically Reed got Blake Lively on board, and then Blake was like, hey, EON Productions, I know through their grapevine, has been kind of dabbling with the idea of broadening their brand into like maybe a female spy franchise or a female thriller. So she was like, Reed, how about me and you go pitch to Barbara Broccoli directly, and together we can get it made. Almost like a package deal. Like, hey, you got the quote-unquote star, you got The Handmaid's Tale, you got a female, led film about a female revenge. Let's do this thing. And that's how they got the meeting with Barbara Broccoli.
That's interesting because they're kind of right? It was like kind of the perfect timing for it, because there has been so much discussion in the last, couple decades, but particularly in the last decade. It never fails. About every couple of years, there's like some kind of think piece about why can't James Bond be a woman, right? Why can't we have Angelina Jolie play Bond, or why can't Kate Winslet play Bond? And to the point where Broccoli and Wilson, and in particular Barbara Broccoli, have actually had to like respond to that and have spoken up about it in the past and said, look, we understand, we appreciate people want more female heroes. We've done the work of trying to make the Bond girls more proactive in the films, but we do view James Bond as a male character. And Barbara Broccoli, to her credit or whatever, has said, we wouldn't want to just make James Bond a woman. We would rather just try to create a female James Bond character. So I think I think they're right. It probably was on EON's radar for a long time to say, we've been saying this for a while. Maybe it's time to finally, put up or shut up and make this attempt, right? Let's see if we can. And honestly, there's got to be a level of cockiness to them. They have run, EON is only kind of concentrated for the most part on this one franchise. They've been a caretaker of this particular franchise for a long time. And you know what? They've done a pretty good job steering it. And I don't blame them for getting cocky and thinking, we could probably do this again, right? So if we're going to do it again, let's do it with what everyone's been asking for, and let's look at a female hero this time.
And EON kind of has a specific way of doing business, Trev. They actually don't really own the Bond franchise, or how do they do it? They license it to certain production companies, and then they can do something with it?
EON actually, from my understanding, now look, what I'm about to say, I'm not going to pretend I'm like the biggest expert on all the wheelings and dealings here. I've read some, articles about it. I've read some books about the Bond franchise. But from my understanding, for the most part, we do look at EON and like Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, inheriting it from Barbara Broccoli's father, Cubby Broccoli, who of course was the one who initially bought the rights to Bond for the cinematic rights from Ian Fleming. I would say EON is who kind of owns Bond, or at least owns a significant chunk of it, right? And so the reason every few years you hear this discussion about, well, who's going to get to have Bond now, is because EON's not a studio. EON's a production company.
Right.
And so they decide to make a new Bond movie, but then someone has to distribute it. And at different times, Bond has been distributed by MGM, United Artists, most recently Sony. And we know that just in the last, for us as recording, recently they signed a big deal with like Amazon, right? So the Bond franchise kind of is a franchise that is licensed out to distributors. And this is the way EON has always worked. EON's not a studio. EON's a production company. They'll produce a movie. They'll get the financing for a movie. They'll put together all the pieces. And then they'll take it to a studio and say, do you want to distribute it? And that also comes to the forefront that you think about the Bond franchise. Chris, I can't remember. I'm not sure if we talked about this in our Bond episode. If we didn't, it's silly that we didn't. But where does a lot of the money for the Bond franchise come from? You know what I'm thinking of, right?
Product placement.
Product, right? So like, where you always like, where's Eon getting this money? Obviously, they're making money from the success of the films, but they also need ancillary funding for this. So they'll like make sure the Bond franchise, he's wearing Omega watches. You know, they have the BMWs in there, the kinds of liquor he's drinking. Everything is kind of financed. So Eon typically will have to work with someone else to finance a film. And for them to approach a project like the rhythm section, they can't just finance this themselves off the Bond movie. They have to like kind of start this process over. Mm-hmm. So this actually gets them in bed with another organization. Do you want to talk about this, Chris?
Yeah, they go to Paramount Pictures, which is cool because Paramount actually runs the Mission Impossible series. So I always found it fascinating in the research that for the rhythm section, it was kind of a like a baby between Bond and Ethan Hunt, you know, in a weird way. So yeah, EON Productions goes to Paramount. And initially, this meeting was set up by the former IM global boss, Stuart Ford. He actually had a friendship with Barbara and Michael. So pre-production financing started with him, but then actually went off the rails in late 2017.
And we should say, just to be clear, when you say IM Global, you're talking about another production company, but one that was kind of more in line already with Paramount, right? So correct. Paramount kind of puts Eon in touch with them, and kind of that's the marriage they're trying to form here. We'll take Stuart Ford's IM Global, and you'll work with them to finance this film, and then we'll distribute it. Yeah.
Yes. But Stuart Ford leaves the company in late 2017. So all of a sudden, Eon is dealing with a lot more Chinese partners at this point. We've talked about this in the past in our Karate Kid episode about Chinese influence and the way that their funding seems to slow down unless they get their way. So that's kind of what starts to happen in the production of this film. Also, it sounds like Mark Burnell's script, reminder that he is the author of the novel series. His script has issues, and some might think that an author turned screenwriter always works out and it should just click, but they are such a different medium that we're kind of seeing that with J.K. Rowling. I know we're not supposed to talk about her anymore, but J.K. Rowling, writes the Harry Potter novels, and they're an extreme success. And she gets to write the screenplays for the Fantastic Beasts series, and by most accounts, that series is awful. So again, the script, screenwriting versus novel writing, very, very different. So from the start, his script had problems. Also, Trev, of course, you have to have miscommunication between Eon and Paramount. Yep. Neither studio seems to know what this film is going to be. Eon is kind of on record saying that it was always pitched the same way from the beginning, as a slow burn, noirish Euro thriller, and not a female James Bond film. But Paramount is kind of in the idea that we're getting a female Bond. Yeah. So now, already pre-production is kind of it's a battle. It's a battle.
Yeah. You have a script that nobody seems to agree on. You know, different people have different issues of it. You have two production companies and a studio that have different views of what the film should be. And it even gets to a point of, by the time you get to production and then post-production, from what I've understood, and Chris, I'm sure you've seen this as well, Reed Moreno, Eon, and Blake Lively, like all three parties have a different view of what this film should be. Right, like they're all suddenly like, Reed Moreno obviously has her vision that she's brought the entire time. I'm sure Blake Lively was kind of like privy to it, but look, Blake Lively is going to be the public face of this.
Yes.
So she probably, once she starts to see it coming together, has her own thoughts on like, well, what would actually be best for my image and my career? So she has her own opinion, and then you have Eon and probably more importantly Paramount saying, hold on a second, why isn't this as like kind of propulsive and like action packed as a Mission Impossible film or as some of the more successful Bond films? So yeah, you just have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, a lot of different viewpoints on what this film should be, and that's never great, and that always leads to the kind of problems we're looking at here. And this is what happens when Eon has to work in this kind of more, as I've seen certain articles say, this like indie financing world where they kind of had to answer to a lot more voices.
And I guess, listeners, I bet you're wondering, like, what is the rhythm section? Okay. Like, I know we said off the top, like, how little it made at the box office, but I don't think you realize how much Paramount kind of dropped the ball with even marketing this film. It actually was delayed almost a full year. Blake Lively hurt her hand quite badly, so they had to delay for at least 6 months for her, but it became a whole year for the production. And I guess Paramount kind of cut their losses with the promotion and advertising on it. They spent the bare minimum, which is around $20 to $25 million, and just kind of letting it die on the vine. Like, honestly, Trev brought this film to my attention months ago, and I think I even texted him, like, what are we even talking about here? Like, I don't even remember this, and I know a lot of stuff has happened in the world since January 2020, but this one really disappeared, and I don't think anybody even knew it existed, even on its opening week. So this one, it's unfortunate, and we'll get into the specifics of why we think that happened by the film itself and why it didn't gain any traction, but Paramount really just kind of left it to die.
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier when I said maybe both of us will have something to say about when it came out and how that ties into the success of it, but I know this isn't as true as it used to be, but in general, January is looked at as a dumping ground, right? And particular kind of films have been able to rise above that. In particular, I think there's kind of an assumption now that if you release like a horror film in January, you're probably okay because horror tends to bring an audience at any time. But when you are trying to put forward a new big action franchise and you're like, you know, from the studio that brought you Bond and they're putting it out in January, that has a bad look. I think. And so, and as you said, there just wasn't a lot of promotion for it. I do remember seeing this trailer a few times with some other films I saw in like late 2019 or whatever. But yeah, it certainly didn't feel like a movie that the studio was like very behind. You know, you didn't see like a press blitz for this. You and I think it was you said that one of the great things about the Bond franchise, when going back to EON, how they kind of handle their properties, is how they make Bond always such an event, right? They like put so much work into making it feel like you got to see the new Bond movie. And by the time this came out, it was more like, yeah, we made this movie. If you want to see it, fine. I don't really care anymore, right? Yeah. And yeah, just like kind of really it didn't seem to be like any faith in this from any kind of anybody involved anymore at this point.
Well, do we have faith in this, Trev? I guess we'll find out right now.
I lost my family 3 years ago. They were killed. I have nothing left. I'll find the people who did this. I'll kill every last one of them. I need your help.
Stop. Don't panic. Be calm. Be still. Shoot me.
What?
Right here. You gotta get your rhythm section under control. Think of your heart as the drums. Your breathing as the bass. That's the easy part.
What's the hard part?
Living with it. You're gonna have to be someone else.
Let's go. I'm gonna do this my way.
A lot of people think that you're dead.
I get that a lot. Think of your heart as the drums, your breathing as the bass.
The rhythm section.
When are you going to teach me to fight?
It would take too long.
How long?
Your menopause will be a distant memory. That's a good start.
A young woman named Stephanie Patrick turns to drugs and prostitution after her parents and siblings are tragically killed in a plane crash. When Stephanie discovers that the crash was not an accident, but a covered-up terrorist bombing, she tracks down a former MI6 agent who helps her train for her quest of vengeance.
Yeah, the rhythm section. What a title that just like screams franchise. I'm going to go first on this one, Chris. Now, I think for both of us, this was a first-time watch, right?
Yep.
And as is usually the case, we have not spoken to each other. So right now, neither of us knows how each other feels. And I don't know if what I'm about to say is any kind of surprise to you, Chris. But I will say this is a movie where, so going into it, what did I know about this? Well, I did some research ahead of time, to the bare degree. I didn't want to spoil anything. But this is a film that has a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's with 182 reviews. That's from critics, right? A 44% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Its Metacritic score is 45. On Letterboxd, it is mostly, from what I saw, 2 or 2.5 reviews out of 5. So this is not a well-liked film. Well, Chris, I'm here to tell you, I don't know how you're going to feel, but I believe every movie that is, universally hated needs someone to come into the fray to speak up for it to a certain degree. And today, I'm willing to be that person. Because I actually think this movie kind of low-key, slaps a little bit. I'm not here to call this the best movie we've watched by any means. I'm not here to say this is a misunderstood masterpiece. But do I think this movie deserves those scores I just talked about? And do I think maybe people misunderstood this movie? Yes. And Chris, you were always kind enough to send me kind of research articles to look at. I was in particular taken with an article from The Hollywood Reporter, written by a journalist named Richard Newby. And he wrote an article called Why the Rhythm Section Was Left in the Cold. And he was kind of on my side. So I don't know Richard Newby, but Richard Newby, you and I could probably grab a beer sometime because you seem like a cool dude. Because I'm kind of with him on what he says about the film. And I just want to read one part in particular where he says, the critical score for the film on Rotten Tomatoes sits at 32%. As I just alluded to, it actually got lower than that eventually. It took in a dismal $2.8 million over the opening weekend. Neither the critical thrashing the film received, nor the lack of box office support from audiences is deserved. But both are reminders that for as much as critics and audiences tend to want stories that are new and break the rules, they seem to reject the films that do at a frequency that's nothing short of alarming. And this is where I agree with Richard Newby. So I'm getting a sense, I have a feeling this might be a disagreement with us. I don't think it's going to be a super intense, drag down fight disagreement. But I do think this is a movie that people look at and want it to be a female Bond movie. And I actually do think Reed Moreno is trying something much more interesting here. Is it always working? No. But I was actually quite taken with what she's going for. And I'll get into that as we talk about the film. But I think it's very interesting that instead of being the standard spy thriller, this is instead a movie that is very much about trauma, about kind of inexperience, about incompetence when going on a revenge mission. There's a couple of comparisons I want to make a little later. So I have to say, I'm just going to say it. Yeah, I like this. I came away actually a fan of the rhythm section. So have at it. Tell me I'm an idiot, whatever. But I think this movie is better than its reputation has already established. And I wonder if it'll change over time.
Well, I'm definitely not going to call you an idiot. You know that already, so I don't need to tell you. Yeah. I can't disagree with some of the things that you're saying, okay? So I like that this is a bit more of a deconstruction of an assassin type of film, okay? I like that it's so intimate. I like how it deals with survivor's guilt. Stephanie was supposed to be on that plane.
Yeah.
And that's
the whole thing is like the family wasn't supposed to be on that plane. On that flight, they changed their flight so that they could get a flight that they're all on together, and then she still decided not to go.
Correct.
And so that's the guilt she covers, yeah.
And let me get this out of the way. Blake Lively is phenomenal in the movie.
Yeah, and one thing we should say, to be clear, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know much about this film, which I'm guessing is probably every listener, if you look into the negative reviews and things, the one kind of consistent thing that critics agreed on is nobody really had a bad thing to say about her.
No.
And that ends up being the shame of this film, right, is that a movie that was clearly designed to be a star vehicle for her, everyone kind of agrees she's actually really good in this. Yeah. The problems people have with the movie kind of go beyond her. So no shade on her at all. She rules in this. Yeah.
No, she's awesome. Yeah. She does a great job of selling the trauma. The dress down look is fantastic. Her shakiness, her cadence, she's constantly fidgeting. And they really sell that amateur, just everyday person training to be an assassin. They kind of nail that, because she kind of bumbles around when she goes on these hits, and she kind of botches them, to be totally honest. And I think that's all really, really good.
And also, you know what? It's about time we send one of our American actors over to take one of the British roles.
Totally.
We got a British Spider-Man, we got a British Batman, there's Superman, all right, Blake Lively, go and take iconic British character Stephanie Patrick. Whatever. It's baby steps, right?
So that's, let me just get that out of the way of saying, like, that's what I do agree with. And I think there's something that Reed Moreno is getting right. Mm-hmm. The thing that I can't get on board is that this is just, to be a good revenge movie, you need to be simple. Okay? Like, you need to be simple, and you need to be personal. And I think it kind of fails right away by making this tragedy so disassociated from our main character. Think of movies like, so let me explain. So think of movies like John Wick. You know, his dog gets killed. Spoilers. Taken. You know, his daughter gets taken and forced into sex trafficking. Kill Bill. Even the more recent Promising Young Woman. Let's talk about some, like, women, female, you know, revenge films. The simpler, the better for revenge. I think the rhythm section is far too complicated for its own good. It's too complex that you kind of start to lose the plot a little bit. And it's just not exciting. And I know that's not what it's going for, but you're still getting me to come to this revenge thriller where you want me to show up for another 3 films watching this character. And I think this movie's so dour, it's so bleak, it's so grim. And by the end of it, she's still not really that great of an assassin, like, at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That I'm like, in the context of this podcast and the context of, like, going forward into a franchise, I just find Stephanie Patrick is just like a resounding thud going into another movie, because I'm just like, there's no hook. There's no hook to this film. Let's talk, like, we talked about Salt. This is what I love about our theme months, is, like, March Mix-Up really works nicely because there's Salt, an Angelina Jolie spy thriller that we both quite enjoyed, and it failed on its own. Then we talk about James Bond, a universally beloved, huge success. And then we talk about this film, and it's got the people that made James Bond, the success, make this, but then it doesn't arise to even the levels of Salt for me, because I think Salt has a hook. There's something that gets me excited, and at least it has some good action. In this one, I understand the deconstruction. I get it. I'm all for it. I know you want more of the artsy, boring, whatever. I get it. I'm not trying to be flippant either, I swear. But I do think that give me something to be excited. Because I think there's a problem with the tone in this film. It's a fucking. Oh, sorry, I swear too much. One of our listeners wrote us a nice review and noticed that I swear too much, so I apologize. I'm going to try my best not to. But it's kind of a downer. So when a certain, like, needle drops hit, or a couple of quote unquote humorous moments happen, it just doesn't feel right. And I felt the editing was really shoddy when it came to that kind of stuff.
So I think the tough thing about this conversation is going to be, it ultimately just does come down to entirely personal preference, right? And I think this is the thing. This is what I mean. Maybe this will be interesting simply because we are coming at this from different perspectives, but I don't think we're going to be very, like, confrontational about it. Because this
isn't going to be Solo.
No. And you just acknowledge, like, you kind of put it in, like, a flippant way, but you're right in that you tend to be a little bit more into, like, big action blockbuster stuff, and I kind of tend to like a little bit more of the character-driven, dour, as you said, kind of exploration. So it's probably not surprising I would be the one who connects to this.
Of course.
I would say I do bristle a little bit at the idea, and I've seen this in reviews too, and it is what kind of bothered me, this idea of it being, there being nothing exciting and no, like, decent action in this. This is where I do feel like, and Chris, I'm not accusing you of this by any means, so don't take this the wrong way, but I will say in terms of the overall critical response, and you and I have certainly discussed how hard of a time female directors have in Hollywood and getting a certain kind of respect.
Sure.
I do think this is another example where I feel like, I really feel bad for Reed Moreno, because I bet you this movie really did a number on her in terms of getting future work and, like, her reputation in Hollywood. But I've certainly seen reviews say, like, well, geez, it's like the action is just terrible considered, like, what's trying to be this female Bond. And if you refer back to what EON has said, and this idea of her trying to push forward this different kind of vision for the kind of movie she's trying to make, this, like, smaller scale, more trauma driven, thriller film, no decent action. I would say if you take the movie at the level it's at, there's a car chase sequence in this that I actually found, maybe you disagree, I thought this was, like, a really cool idea. I know we've seen versions of this kind of played out before. But there's an entire car chase sequence in this where the entire sequence is played with the camera in the passenger seat next to Blake Lively. So just a oneer, right? And I thought that sequence was actually pretty exciting. I liked that quite a bit. I thought, in its own way, I found that to be just as effective an action sequence as the car chase in Salt. There's also a really good oneer fight between Stephanie Patrick and her trainer, who we haven't even talked about the other cast yet, but the other significant cast member in this. There's a moment where she's begging him to train her to fight. He keeps saying no, and finally he just attacks her in the kitchen, and that's a really like kind of compelling oneer fight scene too. Now maybe those are the only 2 action sequences I would point to, but 2 in a hour and 45 minutes, not something to sneeze at. So I think there's decent action in this actually.
Well, I agree. Those are the 2 scenes that are the standouts for the action side for sure. Like I have no complaints there, but I'm gonna go back to what you said right before describing the car chase. You said, we've seen this before, and I don't think this movie, I don't think it's doing anything unique as it thinks it's doing. You know what I mean? Like I think it's trying to be sort of artsy and intimate and introspective, and I like all that, but I feel like it's not doing much that I haven't seen before in a bunch of these types of thrillers. Like I've seen this already, and even in the action, okay, yes, oneers are cool. Okay, like they're good. Like, but every action movie now has to have them. You know what I mean? Like I've seen them. I get it. And this one now strips it down so far that it just becomes boring. Like I just felt it was boring.
But
I hate using that word. Because it's too puts a spotlight on what I don't mean. You know what I'm trying to say. I don't mean it's boring, but like it's it's an easy word to use right now. Go on. Sorry.
Well, but don't see. But what I'd say is that don't
meandering. That's a word. Meandering.
And I don't think I'm going to convince you. I don't think I'm going to sway you. But
sure.
I would just ask, when you say like, well, this movie's not doing anything we haven't seen before, but you and I have already alluded to. Don't you think the interesting element of this is you kind of made it as a joke, right? But you mentioned that by the end of the movie, Stephanie Patrick is still not a real assassin, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately what I did see, now here, I'm going to go back to the Richard Newby article, because actually, Chris, I wish I could prove this is true, but you'll just have to take my word for it. I hope you trust me as a man of my word.
I do.
I wrote a particular movie's title in my notes as I was watching this, because this movie made me think of another movie. And then this is why I say, man, me and this Richard Newby guy.
Should I say the title that I thought of too? Maybe it's the same title.
Maybe. What was the one you're thinking of?
The American.
Okay, I've never seen that. So
okay, go on. Sorry, go on.
No, I was thinking of a movie called Blue Ruin. So Blue Ruin is a film from Jeremy Saulnier, who went on to do the amazing Green Room, right, among other things. Mm-hmm. And Blue Ruin is this kind of incredible, low budget revenge film. And I'm in general, like, revenge films are a genre I love. I think we all do, right? If you like action cinema, you love a good revenge film. Mm-hmm. And Blue Ruin, which stars Macon Blair, kind of got some attention at the time for being one of the first revenge films to say, hey, by the way, revenge probably isn't easy. And in fact, when you embark on a revenge mission, it probably is not going to go as well as most movies depict it going. It's not like a regular person who loses their family or something can just become a badass overnight and turn into this assassin. And I will admit, I think Blue Ruin does it better than this film, but that's the way I was thinking about watching this. And sure enough, Richard Newby made that comparison in his article as well. So this is kind of like the high-level, bigger budgeted version of Blue Ruin. And another movie it made me think of is last year, one of my favorite movies last year, which I would also point to. I'm still giving Rhythm Section props, but I'd also point to a more successful version of this. Is last year there was an incredible Danish movie starring Mads Mikkelsen called Riders of Justice. That's actually very similar to this film about some people who about an individual whose family was killed in a bombing and is told by someone, hey, by the way, I found out who was behind that bombing. Do you want to try and take revenge on him? And then Mads Mikkelsen puts together his team, and this movie also plays on the idea, like, what if you're, like, kind of not great at that? What if you're bad at that? And that's what I think this film is doing well. So when you say there's nothing new here, I think that's the element, and I think that's what threw people off. And I think you have to go in understanding that, and I think if you do, you might respond to it a little bit better, is that this is not a movie about someone becoming a female Bond. This is a movie about someone who has a tragedy, wants to respond to it, finds a way to respond to it, gets involved with these people who are involved in, like, the CIA and MI6 and says, can you train me? And they're like, yeah, I guess. But she's never really good at it. She fucks up constantly. She gets beat up. She makes mistakes. And that's where I'm not, like, super sad there aren't sequels to this. But when you say that at the end you're not at all interested to see what happens to Stephanie Patrick, I will admit that by the end of this, I was kind of compelled to read the second book, only to say, to what you're going off of, I'm kind of with you in that I don't know how you tell more stories of this character, and that's what makes me interested. Like, why do we need 3 more stories of Stephanie Patrick? Because she still is not this badass spy at the end. So I'm actually kind of compelled to see what that next story would be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I think is like the unique element of this.
Okay, and I hear you, and I agree with parts as usual.
Yeah,
as usual. And I just maybe it's this. Maybe I just had such a at the end she's not like full on assassin, but she's basically hired, and this awesome song comes on, and it's all like, oh yeah, she's on to the next, you know? And I'm just like, well, no, she's like pretty terrible at this still. And I guess the movie tries to do that have its cake, eat it too type of thing. Like, she's not good at this, but yet she still kind of completes her arc and completes the mission and does everything and figures it all out super easy by people just telling her. She does no real work to do anything. I just have a hard time believing that this nobody crack addicted prostitute can turn it all around in a week by running around a lake a few times and shooting at some mannequins because Jude Law told her to. I just find it's like, I don't understand why did Jude Law pick her? Why did she even go to Jude Law? Why did the newspaper article guy who's uncovered this cover up, why does he go to her? Like, why is this happening? Why did they choose her? She's just some girl, and that's okay. But you got to give me something. You got to give me something of a backstory that maybe she's interested in something of this. She gets it. Why does she all of a sudden go from, like I said, crack addicted prostitute to MI6 is like, yeah, we got to get her on the payroll.
I mean, here's where I actually will agree with you a little bit. I think there's something missing in the movie on that level. I think the movie does try to allude to it, and I bet you, I'd say it's probably a safe bet this is better established in the book.
Sure.
Right? I would bet you this is a much better book than a film, simply, from the purposes of having more time to develop the character. And I'm sure you kind of heard it, but it goes by so quick. There is some discussion about how before this family tragedy, before she fell into this kind of post-tragedy life, she was like a star student at like a prestigious university. She was like an athlete. So she actually is meant to already have this kind of like certain background where she seems like somebody that maybe would have been recruited for this kind of position before she became what she is. And it's almost like they're willing to maybe see that potential in her yet. I also just wonder though, if the movie could have just pushed that a little further and said, actually, they're just throwing darts everywhere, right? Like maybe this reporter is going to like everybody who had somebody who died in this explosion. And is telling them, hey, did you know that, like, this happened? And maybe it's not that he ever thought she would be, like, the instrument of revenge, but he's just waiting to see, is somebody going to be? And she's just the one who took the impetus. That's me kind of making excuses for the film, but no, it's actually me acknowledging. I do agree with you. That could have been put into the film. That could be a subplot that's a little bit more developed to explain, why does this journalist who comes to her and tells her, hey, actually, that wasn't a plane accident. There wasn't an accident that caused a plane crash. It was a bomb. I can tell you who planted the bomb. You're right that the movie makes it seem too much like he's trying to set her up immediately to be the instrument of revenge. Mm-hmm. I would actually argue it would have been better if it was suggested that he's just telling everybody that he knows, right? That is connected to this accident. And for whatever reason, she's the one, and I think this works, right? She's the one because she's fallen so far, because she has nothing else to live for. She just actually convinces herself, I'm going to die anyways. I've fallen into drug addiction. I'm a prostitute now. My life is terrible. I have nothing left to live for. She basically says that in the film. If I'm going to die in the next year or so anyways, I might as well go out taking down the person that created the bomb. And Chris, I know I've been talking for a bit, but I do want to say, to speak to that, I do think another actually interesting element of the film to me that could have maybe used a couple more scenes, but I liked it just in its concept, was the relationship between her and the other family she gets in contact with, who end up like financing her mission.
Just honor her word.
But I mean, I'm sure that family seems to be pretty prestigious and pretty rich, right? When she gives them the ring and when she tells them who she is, I don't think it's a stretch to believe that family could look up and see who she is and see that she is the person she says she is. But I did like the idea. I like that. I kind of like that relationship between her and the rich wife, who they lost a son in the plane crash, and they agree to give her like the money she needs to finance this revenge mission, because they're two like. they're too rich and fucking old and lazy to do anything about it, right? And then this like fucking woman shows up and says, "Just give me some money, I'll go kill this guy." And they're like, all right, you know.
Yeah, I guess I just like I like the idea of this wealthy financier family who has connections to the tragedy, sure, but again, it just doesn't do enough. It's just she walks in and he even says, "How'd you get in?" And she's like, "I don't know." like she just is in the house, and they just trust her after 2 minutes. Like, just this stranger gives him her ring. Okay, sure, we'll finance you whatever you want, and it never comes back to the family. They never check up. They're never wondering what's going on, what's happening with our money, how far are you into getting things done, and especially when she's bumbling around and potentially causing more casualties in her wake. You'd think that family would be checking in, being like, you know, we're connected to you. And you've caused children to get killed at this point. And I think there's a soupçon of a good idea there. But like I said, I think that this movie is thinking it's smarter and more clever than it actually is. And maybe that is the post-production issues. Like, who knows, right? Like, maybe there is 30 minutes of cut footage. We'll never know. But I feel that the movie at its face value is disjointed.
It's weird because I think, like, you just said something earlier, which when you said it, I kind of like got my hackles up just a little bit. But I think it speaks to, this is the difficult thing, because I did enjoy this movie, but I'm not blind to some of its problems. I'm not blind to the fact that it's not always as successful at what it's trying to do as it could be.
Sure.
But at the same time, you mentioned earlier where you said, like, well, I don't believe that this woman who is like, you know, a crack addicted prostitute could suddenly become like a badass by just running around a lake a couple times. And my first thought was, I wonder how many other movies Chris has watched that has a very similar idea that you've just bought into. We see this so often in Hollywood, right? Where someone just becomes a badass like immediately through a little bit of a training montage. And I think this movie there is like taking just a cheat that plenty of other movies have gotten away with. And I think the difficult balancing act this movie's trying to play off is that by being a movie that's kind of more about like the trauma of this and a trauma kind of driven character, it is like playing. I will admit this is a movie that's somewhat trying to have its cake and eat it too, right? To be a very, very realistic film to certain degrees. Like, this is almost like, this is the more realistic spy thriller, right? This is more realistic than a Bourne movie or a Bond movie, and certainly than a Mission Impossible movie. But Reed Moreno probably knows, I'm still making a movie for Paramount. I gotta have some of that I gotta have some of those beats and tropes. I'm thinking of Matt Reeves saying recently how he wanted to make like just a detective movie for Batman, right? But he's like, but I know I gotta have a Batmobile chase in it. And I bet you Reed Moreno was probably like, shit, I gotta have the part where she just trains for like a week and suddenly can do this, right?
Right.
And to that I would say, at least to me, at least they never pushed it that far. At least Stephanie never becomes John Wick. She never is. Every murder she makes in this is sloppy. It's like brutal. She doesn't like beat anyone's ass, right? She always kind of gets by on luck, and that's what I liked about the movie. But I'm fully aware not everyone's going to respond to that. I could just say it worked for me.
And again, to even back up my other further comment about how many movies I've seen that have done that and gone away with it. I think you nailed it by saying the realism. This movie is so in tune with being so real and so raw and so deconstructive that, yes, your reality breaks when I see Blake Lively get in some cold water and now Jude Law thinks you're ready. You know what I mean? Like, that's, I think, the problem with it, is that it's going so far into realism that when it tries to come back into quote-unquote campy territory, that's where my tonal shifts just don't work, because it's going so far in one direction that it becomes confused.
Well, you just mentioned his name, though, so can we like, at least it does have, at least that all falls on the shoulders of Jude Law.
Yes.
So can you at least come with me and agree that Blake Lively's awesome in this, but I also think Jude Law is pretty awesome in this.
Yes, I just don't understand why he wants to take this girl under his wing and
right,
wants to get her clean and all this other stuff. Like, he's just an MI6 agent.
Well, I mean, in terms of getting it clean, let's just assume he's actually a fairly decent guy, right? Like, I think we can just roll with that.
That has
right?
killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people and says to her, "Oh, it sticks with you. It's something I have to live with the rest of my life." Like, he's pretty cold-hearted.
he's cold-hearted, but this is, look, Chris, this is a trope, and I'm sure it exists in real life too, right? People who are like that, who still, when someone shows up and says, "Hey, my whole family was killed by this terrorist," the same terrorist you're after, I don't find it to be unrealistic to say he might take some sympathy on her.
Okay.
And in terms of him finally just like, you know, she kind of pesters him for a long time before he finally just says, "Look, you want me to train you to fight? Fine, then I'll just beat the shit out of you. Right? Let's see what happens."
Sure.
And I think, I will say this, like, I'm kind of with you, and I think the movie's trying to allude to this. And so here again, I'm look, at the end of the day, I'm giving this movie a good score, not a great score.
Sure.
But I think there's something compelling.
And also, I'm not giving it a horrible score either.
Yeah,
let me pop it. I am in that middle ground. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's great. I think it's just it's fine, which we've used before. But I do know that there's merit to it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think with the character of, we mentioned Jude Law. Jude Law plays a character named Boyd in this, Ian Boyd. He's a former MI6 operative, right? And she eventually gets in touch with him, and it turns out he's after this terrorist as well, and he basically becomes her mentor, but they never really have a great relationship, right? This isn't Bond and Q. This isn't Batman and Alfred. It's pretty contentious all the way through. But I will say that's kind of where I like it too, but this is where I agree with you, the movie could have pushed this further. I get the idea that at a certain point, it's never like he's like, "Yes, you're my surrogate daughter now. Yes, I love you so much, I'm going to make you the ultimate assassin." I think he ultimately sees her as like a means to an end, and he kind of uses her as a tool, right? Like he even sends her on missions that are kind of like, are kind of shitty, right? Like where he tells her like, "Hey, go sleep with this guy, and once you sleep with him, then murder him." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, you got to do it, right?" So he actually kind of, and that speaks to what you're just saying about how I think he has a moral center, but he is kind of not a great guy. That's why I liked him in this. I liked that this was like a more complex mentor character. And one of my favorite parts of the film, and this is going to sound so, I'll swear for you, Chris, since you don't want to anymore. One of the more fucked up parts of this film, but it fucked up in a way that I thought was, again, interesting, because it's not the kind of thing you'd see in a Bond movie, is where he sends her on a particular assassin mission. She tries to do it and messes up, as she does consistently through the film. He tells her, "This is going to be simple. You seduce this guy, take this knife, stab him in the throat, great." She tries it, fucks up, ends up just slicing the guy in the mouth. Mm-hmm. He gets away, right? She goes to the car with Jude Law. She's like, "Sorry, I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill him. It didn't go the way I thought it would." Jude Law is kind of like, "No problems. I have a backup plan." This guy comes out, gets in his car, starts driving away. The car explodes. So he's like, Jude Law's like, I left this up to you. You didn't do it. I took care of him. And then they find out the dude's children were in the car as well. Mm-hmm. And I was like, shit, that's what I mean. Like, that's the kind of stuff you never see in a Bond movie. And I was like, okay, this movie's actually getting into, and then they play it on that. They play it on like, Jude Law has a reaction to that, and she gets very upset about that. And says, look, we just killed more innocent people. And he's like, yeah, and I just have to live with that. And even the way he delivers that line, I actually love, because he plays this like, not the first time it's happened to me, right? Like, I've accidentally murdered plenty of innocent people, just part of the job. And so I do like that. This movie has this like, this overall plot idea hovering over it is Stephanie Patrick going to turn into Boyd? Or can she kind of come away with like her humanity? And my guess is that maybe that's what the rest of the books are about. I don't know. Maybe I'll read them someday. But I liked that.
Yeah, I think I just keep coming back to the why of it all, because again, Jude Law, I understand his character, I actually like what you've just said. I think it makes a lot of sense. But he wants to take this girl under his wing and kind of use her as a tool for bringing down bad guys, quote unquote. But he never gives her shit for not completing the missions. You know what I mean? Or bungling them, or doing them poorly. Like even that whole situation of him blowing up the car, which yes, I agree is a really good character moment, but also what? Like, why did he even get her to do all that stuff in the first place? Just rig the truck. Like, he was going to get in there one day. Like, it just, again, it stretches my believability because it's going for such realism that why does he have these backup plans that are so eventful, I guess? Like it wasn't even like it was all in the open. It was on the street. It wasn't like even in an alleyway. It was during the day. Like, just blow up the car. What's the difference of him just grabbing a rocket launcher and shooting it at the car at that point? But yet he's trying to train this secret assassin to be awesome. And I'm just like, well, if he's just blown up cars, like, why the hell do we even have her?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't entirely disagree. I think there's a lot to this. It seems like like consistently through the movie, he seems to be like testing Stephanie, right? It's almost like he's trying to find out, can she be this badass assassin? Could I use her as a tool? And ultimately, he uses her in a particular way where he has her like take on the identity. And Chris, I did do a little bit. I kind of read just like the basic plot synopses of at least the next 2 books.
Okay.
And they kind of come back to this idea of he essentially has her replace there was an assassin that Boyd killed named Petra, right? And he says, you are going to take that identity on, right? I killed Petra, but actually Petra, because of her connections in the underworld, she's actually somebody who could kind of get into this mission. So you'll just like kind of pose as her. So I think the movie is trying to like kind of sell the idea that he's basically testing Stephanie consistently to see, could she become Petra? Could I turn her into this tool I can use? And I think by the end of the movie, I would say I don't think the movie actually sells at the end that he's still convinced. Like one of the last things he does in the movie is he pulls a knife on her and almost murders her, right? Yeah. And then he just kind of has a change of thought at the last second. But for a moment there, it is like he just sees her as like a loose end to get rid of. And so, yeah, actually, there's a part of me that says like I actually would have continued to like to see this Boyd Stephanie relationship, to see, do they ever get to a point where they actually do work together well, or is he kind of always just like, I don't know, I'll keep using you, but I don't know if you're ready for this. But
again, I don't know the books, but I would like to see that get there. But then also maybe she starts using him to a means to an end, and then the ultimate I don't know, the climax of the book series is actually Boyd v. Patrick.
Yeah. And here's what and Chris, I wonder, I think you might agree with this. So to give you a little bit of like leeway here, or say I come down with you. So I like this movie, right? I actually watched it, and maybe it was definitely low expectations helped for sure.
Sure.
Because I went in this expecting a trash fire based on the critics, and I don't think this movie is that. I think Reed Moreno is trying to do some very interesting things. And again, you know me, I'm always like an advocate for ambition, sometimes over like success, right? And I think Reed Moreno is trying some very ambitious stuff in this. I think the way it's directed is very interesting at times. I think some of the editing, I know you mentioned some of the editing being not great at times, but I think some of the editing, even though the way the opening credits are edited, kind of going back in time, flashing forward and backwards in time to show like the tragedy in her life now. Some of the music cues in this I think are very effective. So I think it's well directed, everything, right? However, I will say, as I was watching this, I had this thought that this shouldn't have been a movie. I actually feel like this felt like this should have been like an Amazon show. Like, I actually think this story would play well given like 6 hours or so to like develop this more and really get into like the training period with Boyd, more stuff between them. And I wonder if each of the 4 Stephanie Patrick books could maybe be like a season of a TV show. And ultimately, even like just the vibe of this movie feels kind of like a pilot to me more than it does a movie. Does that, you kind of agree with that?
Yeah.
Or?
No, I absolutely do.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing. I think sometimes people just watch a movie and mentally you have a sense of like, it's not that this is like bad, but it's not movie good. It's like it's TV decent or TV good, right? And I think that's kind of maybe what this movie is.
And again, it's sort of incomplete in the things that we're mentioning. Like, it should have been developed more in a lot of areas. And I think because, again, this is the translation from novel series to screenwriting, you have to cut things. You have to shorten things. You have to change different characters to different meanings. You really have to condense something to tell that full story within, a 2-hour running time. And I think, in my opinion, this is just one of those casualties of probably a very good, or almost, let's say a great story condensed into a fine motion picture.
Yeah, but because it's clearly a great concept, right? There's no denying, like, the idea is great. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like, I love the idea of a normal, average, everyday person bumbling through to become an expert assassin. Like, I do like that. But I think just, I don't know, this was missing. It was missing that memorability. That's not a word. Like, it was just missing something memorable. Something for me to look back on and say, hey, wow, you gotta go see the rhythm section. And especially in the context of this podcast, right? Like, you've said that to me a few times when I watch stuff and I say, hey, it was fine. But you say, in the context of failure to franchise, why is this not clicking with people? And I think a lot of it, yes, it has to do with expectations. That is a gigantic part of this story, is expectations. And luckily, I went in without expectations. So I kind of went in thinking the worst. And I told you I didn't even watch the trailers before going in. Afterwards, though, after seeing the film and doing the research and seeing all the issues with post-production, Trev, actually today I texted you saying, hey, maybe just watch the trailers again to get a thought for them. Mm-hmm. And oh boy, are those trailers trying to sell female James Bond. Mm-hmm. It is action-packed. Every single little moment that you get of action in the film is wrapped up in that 2-minute trailer. The music is high octane. Even like the shots of Blake Lively are badass as hell. Like, it is really, really selling that. So I do see that people were disappointed when they saw it, but also, Trev, like, 30 people and their dog went to go see it too. So I'm not sure what the marketing can be to blame. I don't know.
Well, I'll get to that in a second. I will say, like, this is a movie that, like, trailer-wise, it was sold to James Bond fans. Mm-hmm. When honestly, the target audience for this film is the same kind of audience who... Do you remember a couple years ago, there was a Nicole Kidman film called Destroyer from Karen Kusama?
I think so, yeah.
Or, like, there was a film with Olivia Wilde, like, a couple years ago called Vigilante, that are, like, these more, like, kind of down and dirty, as you said, like dour, intimate, gritty, and depressing character pieces. And that's actually the target audience for this. Where it gets confusing is... We're talking about a $50 million version of those from EON Productions, the people behind Bond. Mm-hmm. And this is where you get into... I kind of understand that, like Paramount saying, wait a minute, I thought you were giving us like Casino Royale, right? Mm-hmm. And EON saying, no, actually we've always tried... We didn't want to make another Bond movie. We wanted to make this like different thing. But I'm not surprised there was a disconnect there. To your point about like nobody going to see it, those two trailers you sent me, so there's trailer 1 and trailer 2. The trailer I was very, very familiar with from the theater was the one that has like the Sleigh Bells song in it. So first of all, hey, you already won me over because I love Sleigh Bells. That song is awesome. It's the song that ends the movie. Great kind of capper song, right? Where Did You Sleep Last Night is the name of the song. Then the other trailer, though, the one that I think was like the less seen trailer, did something that the other trailer did not do. You and I don't often talk about this kind of hyper-specific stuff. And maybe this isn't even hyper-specific. Maybe I'm silly to say that. But you just meant, why did only 30 people and their dog see this? Let's talk about the name of this movie, the rhythm section.
It's horrible.
It's horrible until you learn what it means. And then I actually think it's a kind of interesting name. The problem is, you do have to watch the movie to learn what it means, right? Yeah. Like, when they finally explain what rhythm section means in the context of the movie, I'm like, well, that's actually kind of a neat title, but there's no reason you would ever understand that. The one trailer actually tells you, it just puts the dialogue right in. The other trailer's like, nah, forget it. The rhythm section, whatever, you know what it means, right? It's about like music. Well, no, it's not. It's about a woman trying to get revenge for a bomb. I don't know if you and I even need to like spoil it here, but I actually like the idea of like what the rhythm section means in terms of like how Jude Law explains it. But yeah, it's like a title of film. You need to fucking make that clear somehow. This isn't Bond where it's already been established and you can just call something Quantum of Solace and people go like, that doesn't make any sense. And think, yeah, but it's fucking James Bond. You're going to see it. This, you needed a title that grabbed people. And yeah, this is not that. Because this makes it sound like the rhythm section. Is this like a sequel to Whiplash? What's going on here? I don't know.
And for the listener, the trailer we're talking about is the one that I dropped into this podcast. So
yeah, so you have heard it actually, yeah.
Yes, you've heard it, and it's about Jude Law talking about like balancing your like your body and your breathing and getting your body to work together to make a kill, basically. You know, like get it together, basically get it together. And it's a shame too because that's a great concept, but the movie doesn't even come back to it. They talk about the rhythm section as a concept in that one line, and that's it. So throughout the entire film, it never comes back to Blake, like, trying to get in touch with her rhythm section. You know what I mean? Like,
it's that one scene, right? The movie starts with, like, the movie does that. I'm not huge on this either, because every movie does this now, right? But the movie starts with, like, the flash forward. And the flash forward is like kind of the one moment where she's trying to use that idea, right? She's trying to, you see her doing one of her kills and her actually telling herself, all right, make sure you're listening to your heart, make sure you're listening to your breathing.
But the problem with that,
when we come back to that scene later, she's not doing it again. So
exactly, and that's the problem because you see that without any context whatsoever, so it's kind of meaningless. I actually forgot that she does say that to herself in the beginning of the film. Because it's meaningless at that point. It doesn't tell us what the concept is until like 30 minutes in. But I think that's the issue. And also, like, the rhythm section, again, it's... What do you call the sequel? Like, the rhythm section : something? Like, you have to always keep the rhythm section... Or what, the rhythm saga again? Like, we're going to bring saga into this? Like, I find it's not a catchy title. The movie doesn't even commit to the concept of the title. And Yeah, you're so right. It does sound like some like symphony movie or something. It's just they kind of shot themselves in the foot with the name. They might have been better calling it the Stephanie Patrick Chronicles or something. You know what I mean? Like something just stupid.
Well, I mean, I can look. I'm not to take any shots at Mark Burnell, because I will say there is a chance I will read some of these other ones just to see if it is better as a book series.
Sure.
But you just mentioned like what would the sequel be? I mean, I think they're probably operating off of the assumption that just like Bond, right? You wouldn't have to call the next one The Rhythm something. You would just go off the names of the books.
Right.
But here's the problem, Chris. I have to tell you, none of the books have very compelling names. The other, and I don't know what order these go in necessarily, but I will tell you the other 3 books in this series are. Actually, I think this is another. I think book number 2 is called Chameleon. Book number 3 is called Gemini, and then book number 4 is called The Third Woman, which actually sounds more like one of those like, Woman in the Window, Girl on the Train kind of mystery titles, right? So none of those titles really kind of grab you, unfortunately. So
no, this is one of those instances that they needed to change the title completely and just made it its own thing.
It's funny because when we talk about Bond, we talked about how like Ian Fleming like purposely chose this like kind of boring name, but now the name's become so iconic to us. Mm-hmm. Even when I look at the covers of these and it says a Stephanie Patrick thriller, and it's just like, Stephanie Patrick, okay, like it's like I don't know, the name doesn't like stick out either. And I maybe if I read all 4 of these, I'd be like, yeah, Stephanie Patrick, it's a great character, but I don't know, it's just there's something about it which it doesn't have that same hook,
And also, yeah, like you're kind of alluding to it, like the books kind of maybe seem like romance novels, mm-hmm. like you're not your assassin thriller series, you're Stephanie Patrick Gemini. Or The Third Woman. Like, I'm just hearing this for the first time, and they don't really. I don't know. They leave a lot to be desired when you're trying to write for that genre.
I don't know necessarily if this is what the next books do. Like I said, I kind of just read the brief plot synopses, and maybe like some of this is hovering around my head. But you just said like, what would the sequel be? I'm going to pitch you a sequel right now, Chris, because in my head as I was just thinking about this, I realized what I would probably do if you came to me and said, hey, you have to write the next Rhythm Section movie, and we're not allowing you to read the next books. I think there actually is an obvious answer to this. Is that you start the next movie and she's not tried to like continue this. She's tried to go back to her normal life. The problem is, for at least a little bit of time as we see in this movie, she posed as this terrorist called Petra, right? Like, Boyd put her into this position to say, you are now Petra, you are going out into public, you are telling people you're Petra. I would assume the next movie would be, or what you could do is have people kind of come for her now because of this identity she took on. And her being like, what the fuck? Like, what's happening? People are trying to kill me now. I'm not this person. But because I posed as this like kind of international terrorist for a bit, suddenly I'm getting pulled in this world again. And now she has to go back to Boyd. He's like, screw off. Like, sorry, not my problem. And she eventually kind of has to convince him, well, you got me into this. You have to help me. That's what I would assume the next sequel to be, or at least what you could do as an independent sequel without the books.
I like that idea. As usual, I think you bring a lot to the table when we talk about what could happen and what could get me excited for the next one. Just don't let Mark Burnell write this thing anymore. He's good at the books. I'm assuming they must be successful enough to get the attention of Hollywood. But you take the reins on that one.
So I get to work with Blake Lively?
No, she's been recast.
Okay.
She's been recast as
all right.
yeah. Drake Grively comes in with a really bad wig, just like in this one.
I did. But the only note I have, I know you have a point you're leading to here, but the only note that I haven't gotten to yet, and what I wrote down was the Rhythm Section, more like Wigs the movie. Am I right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, there's some pretty bad wigs.
It's not great.
I sent it to I sent a picture to somebody, and she said, "Oh, Ghislaine Maxwell's in that film." So anyway, going back to your article that you like, and the author that you are marrying.
Yeah, Richard Newby, great guy.
Richard Newby, great guy.
The only other person I know who likes this movie, so we gotta stick together. Yeah.
You gotta find him on socials, and then you gotta send him this. So I have to say this, and you've heard me talk about this, especially personally, probably on the podcast a few times, but I hate hypocrisy. Really, really, really strongly dislike it. And I especially strongly dislike it in film Twitter. Film Twitter loves to get their panties in a bunch about how we don't have any original IP, We don't have any female-led action films. You know, it's all movies run. It's all Hollywood's run by Disney and the MCU. They all love to bitch and moan about that. But as you've rightly said with Richard Newby.
Richard Newby.
Come
on, don't my buddy Rich. Don't.
I was testing you. You. He rightly points out that Hollywood never greenlights this stuff because the critics don't even show up for them. They don't show up to prop them up. They dispatch of them very quickly, and they like to make fun of them as they die on the vine. So you know what, film Twitter, get your head out of your ass. I'm so tired of hearing you bitch and moan, because you do get films like this, and that's why I'm not necessarily mad at this film. I think it is good at times for sure. But more of this.
Yeah, don't you agree that, like, for whatever you feel about this film, there is an audience for this film that just hasn't found it yet?
Sure.
Because of the way it was sold, because of the way they didn't kind of stay behind it, and because it was kind of probably sold to the wrong audience. I don't think me and this one critic are the only two people who this movie was made for. I don't think they were the only ones who would respond to it. The problem is you try to sell this to the action Bond audience, and not to say like you can be in both, right? But because clearly I am, but you have to be in a very particular audience for this, and they didn't sell it that way. And you're totally right. No. Like that article, to continue off the point, he brings up. He says, I'll just read another quote from it, because why not give this guy some more credit? He says, while the film beats to its own drum, get it? It's plagued by the same issue that plagued The Long Kiss Goodnight, Salt, there you go, Atomic Blonde, and Red Sparrow, and suffocated their franchise potential. None of these characters are based on popular IP or can be evaluated in the context of a beloved franchise. There's little doubt that Black Widow will be a success in May. Guess what? He was right. Given that it has the MCU behind it, and thus the investment of critics and audiences. And if Bond were to be a woman in the future, there's little doubt that despite the raging from social media, that would happen beforehand. It's even worth the wager that if Moneypenny or Nomi receive spin-offs following No Time to Die, they would fare much better than the rhythm section. So yeah, he's saying, like you just said, like, people are like, well, where are these films? And then you put it out, and if it's not attached to something we already know, then, oh well, sorry. And whatever, I think the main takeaway, I'm glad to hear you at least agree with me that, or I think you do, that not the best film we've watched, not the worst, but not a movie that calls for 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, that's pretty baffling to me. This is not one of those where you watch and you go like, holy crap, what a train wreck. This is instead a clearly talented director working with a very strong cast doing great work, trying something ambitious, and maybe coming up short sometimes. And maybe that's more like, you know, fuck, I'd be happy with like a 50% on this. Because then you'd go like, sure. Yeah, I guess that's acknowledging where like they tried something and didn't quite get there. But like the level of vitriol I saw in some of these reviews, I'm like, what movie are you watching? This isn't that bad. Like, so that's, I think, where a lot of my response came from. Just going like, I don't know. I kind of like that they were aiming for something here. And I you and I have said, like, you know, when a female director has like one whiff, that's unfortunately like a huge black eye for them. And I do feel bad for Reed Moreno. At least, thankfully, we know she's a really accomplished cinematographer, a lot of great TV work. I'm sure she can kind of fall back on that. In fact, she followed this up by going into a TV show starring a good buddy of ours, John Leguizamo. But yeah, I think I watch this and I go, I'd actually like to see her given a Bond film off this almost. You know, something with like a better script, obviously. But I think there's enough kind of talent behind the camera here to make me think, working with a better script, I think she would actually deliver something quite impressive.
One thing you missed, Trev, is when you said our cast doing great work. We haven't even mentioned the Sterling K. Brown, your favorite actor. Anyway, I have no opinion on him.
I mean, my mom, like many moms, loves This Is Us. So I'm sure if I told her Sterling K. Brown was in this, she'd be very, very excited. But yeah, I mean, he's fine. You know, he serves his purpose in the movie. I do say.
I mean, does he?
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think the lowest point of this film is the completely out of place sex scene.
Yeah.
Which I don't know why that happens, other than that definitely felt like the studio going, hey, by the way, you got Blake Lively in this. Can you throw in a sex scene? And then maybe even someone speaking up, maybe whether it was, you know, Burnell or Reed Moreno going, does it fit? We don't care. You know, just put it in there.
It was so jarring that I thought it was a dream sequence. I didn't think it was real.
Yeah, honestly, even the way it plays in the film, it feels like a late edition. It doesn't feel like it was supposed to be there, and that's why I'm always suspicious of moments like that where I go, that feels studio notish to me. Like someone wanted a sex scene in there, and this movie didn't need it. There's nothing about the first 20 minutes of this movie and where Stephanie Patrick is at when she's super traumatized, cracked out prostitute, trying to get her life back and just being like, my life is gone. I'm dead. I'm just going to become a assassin. Where I go, boy, I sure hope I see her have sex with someone later. Just like, this isn't James Bond. I don't want to see Stephanie Patrick in that position.
It was weird because on their
No pun intended.
Well, they're in their first meeting in the film, he says something like, we'll get together later to discuss, purely professional. And then she looks at him and goes, what else would it be? And I like that line quite a bit because it's subverting that expectation that they're going to sleep together. And never mind, 40 minutes later they sleep together.
Sleep together. Yep.
So it was just dumb. It was really dumb.
Yeah, not good. I won't deny that.
With that, Trev, I think it's safe to say that we can wrap it up here and briefly summarize our thoughts. I think it's pretty good. It's okay. Didn't love it. Didn't hate it. As a franchise, I think it really is a non-starter for me. But Blake Lively, fantastic. I again with our debate, I don't think we said it enough.
I agree. Actually,
she's phenomenal.
We probably didn't talk about that enough. Actually, we got too involved in like the weeds here. Let's just like if nothing else in the end here, Blake Lively rules in this.
Yes,
like, that is the shame. Like this really should have been. Not, like I said, this really could have positioned her in a different way. I think people need to watch this and just see what more she's capable of.
Big time. She's phenomenal. She's a real talent. I think she does a really good British accent too. Like maybe the Brits that listen to us think it's shit, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty good.
I agree. It actually quite worked well for me. Yeah.
But she was very, very good. And Jude Law's good. Sterling K. Brown is fine. Direction is actually pretty good. The look of it. Oh, we didn't even really talk. The cinematography is really nice. I think it's really it's a very pretty film, as grungy and dour as it can be. But your quick thoughts here.
So I've already made it clear. Like I was surprised by how much I like this. It's just I wouldn't say I love it, but I think this is a movie worth checking out. Go into it with the right expectation. Go into it if you particularly like the idea of a unconventional subversion of spy thriller tropes. This is the Blue Ruin of like spy movies, or the Riders of Justice kind of like a Riders of Justice parallel. Blake Lively's awesome. That's worth seeing. And ultimately, I would say is, Chris, I can't remember if I ever mentioned this to you before, but you've probably seen me allude to this in some of my Letterboxd reviews. I have a kind of idea or a kind of genre that exists in my head called like lazy Sunday movies. Like to me, this fits into that, where you go, that's not a great movie, but if I was just sitting around on a Sunday afternoon and it came on TV, I'd probably watch it all the way to the end.
Right.
And that's not true of all movies, but there are certain movies like that where I go, like, that's just good enough to pull me along, and that's where this falls for me. I'll fully admit I kind of looked it up afterwards, and I saw like the Blu-ray right now is running like for like about $10, and I was like, this might be a $10 Blu-ray purchase. I could see it because I could see revisiting this. This actually worked for me. As I said, I think it low-key slaps, and what I mean by that is I think it's very, very ambitious, and that's what I like, and it's never quite getting to what it could be. But ultimately, I think it's pretty cool that they were trying, and I enjoyed it.
And for those keeping score at home of the F-bombs of this episode, I had one mistaken one, and Trev had probably 12 or 13.
I did that on purpose, man. I'm taking it on for you. Look, the next review can come for me, right?
We need an F-bomb balance in this scene.
You ever seen that like thing where it's like, where there's like the two sets of footprints, but then Jesus starts carrying the guy? That's what I was doing for you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I did just compare myself to Jesus.
That's classic you right there.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on from March Mix-Up, we love our themes, Trev.
We do.
Our theme months are just near and dear. We've actually come up with themes for the entire year, listeners, but I'm not going to give those away today. What I am going to give away is our April Showers Brings April Powers.
We are idiots.
We are the dumbest people in the world. We are going to be looking at Hancock from 2008 and then Sky High from 2005.
Yep. I know like some of our younger audience members won't understand this, but there have been superhero movies in the past that did not start franchises.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at a couple of them right there with Hancock and Sky High. Sometimes, when you don't have Big Daddy DC or Mama Marvel backing you up, sometimes it doesn't quite work out. So
yeah. So to follow along with April Showers Brings April Powers, follow us at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. As I've brought up a couple times now, rate, review, whatever you do. Give us a star rating, throw in an Apple review up there. We have some glowing ones, and those are always fun to read. So keep that up. Also, just join the tribe and hit that subscribe, and you will follow along through all our, this adventure that we keep bringing people on. We have some duds, we have some greatness, and we have some, could have been better.
Some rhythm sections.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
somebody's got to represent the middle at all times, so.
Yeah, you would be the middle.
Oh.
By the way, this is a very good episode.
Yeah, I think so.
I think especially, I wasn't...
It's interesting to have like a disagreement that's like more this civil. I think that like is not something that happens a lot. Yeah,
like sometimes when it's big and loud, it is fun though, and I enjoy those ones.
And I'm also glad. I'm actually glad that we both weren't like cool. I'm glad I actually liked it. Right, I think that makes the episode more interesting.
Yeah. Well, and especially because I like that we both quite enjoyed Salt, and then I like that James Bond. Like I said, I liked how we have some optimism, some positivity in the last few episodes.